Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to day three. To some of you that didn't start this morning with us in the podcasting session, and this is your first session, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for Rocket Fuel Your Giving Circle Transformational Gifts from High Net Worth Donors. Please note we have closed captioning available, and you can enable that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. My name is Sara Lomelin. I'm the CEO of Philanthropy Together, a global initiative to grow and strengthen the field of giving circles with programming like We Give Summit. Today, we're so excited to discuss the 2021 Bank of America study of philanthropy, the powerful data that has there, and to hear, from to hear the tips from this amazing woman, Dianne Bailey, who is part of Philanthropy Together's advisory council, and who is also one of, the godmothers of Philanthropy Together. Dianne has always been a big champion of giving circles, and I am so excited to have her here. Before I pass it to Dianne, I just want to encourage you to engage in the chat, send your questions there. And also, we encourage you to share your feedback following this session. We are going to have a quick two-question poll. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Dianne. Thank you so much.
Sara, thank you. And what a joy it is to be here today. My origin story in philanthropy, such that it is squarely in the Giving Circle movement. As a founding member and founding board member of the Women's Impact Fund in Charlotte, previously part of the Philanthropy board, which then took me to working with the Women's Philanthropy Institute, the research that we do there on all the differences in gender giving with and also volunteering, where I'm so honored to serve as Sara on the National Council. But today I am here to bring the power of the Bank of America study of philanthropy to you. And hopefully help you find ways to use this information to discern pathways to leverage the resources that are so significant within the high capacity giving group, whether that be high net worth or ultra high net worth donors. I want this session to be interactive. There is so much wisdom in this room, and the data is really a jumping off point to share best practices and how we apply it. So without further ado, let me bring up my presentation. So first things first, what is this research? I hope folks have seen it before. It is a continuation of a research series that we have done with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy since 2006. When we began this research, it was important, but now it is critical for reasons that I will describe. Some of you may know it under its prior branding, which was the U.S. Trust Study of High Net Worth Philanthropy. I certainly used it extensively in my work with nonprofits, even before I joined the bank in 2018. All right. Let's lay a little bit of a groundwork on what we're talking about in terms of engaging the assets of high net worth donors in our giving circles. I want you to think about it in at least 4 different ways. The first and the most important, I believe, is engaging these individuals as members of our giving circles. As you will see in the research that I'll bring to you, these donors in general do not believe that they are experts in philanthropy. So they are very much on the learning journey that we see as Giving Circle members day in and day out. So engaging them, if not initially as members of our giving circles, certainly after we've developed the relationship with them as funders, that can be a continuation and an evolution and a maturation of that relationship, but always looking at them as potential members first and foremost. When we look at them as funders, beyond their membership, whether that means a membership contribution to the operating expenses, those membership fees, or the contribution to the grants pool. When we look at their additional funding opportunities, we think about that in three primary buckets. The first, and not the one we'll be talking about today, is as a traditional corporate sponsor. When you're looking at that bucket, that is an entirely different analysis, but certainly aligned. But you want to be looking at it from the lens of marketing, certainly brand visibility, brand favorability, and other benefits for their clients and other stakeholders. But know that you want to be thinking about them in terms of resources they can leverage from their companies as well as their personal assets. These other two buckets are really the buckets I want to focus on today. When you would be looking to these high net worth and ultra high net worth funders for their grant making, whether it's a grant to your giving circle, right? Whether that's a capacity building grant, another grant focused on a programmatic area, or of course, what we're always looking for, which are the unrestricted gifts for operations. So a funder of your giving circle. But I believe the real opportunity, right? The aha moment for high net worth and ultra high net worth, these high capacity donors, the real opportunity for the transformational gifts is as a co-grant maker, right? So either looking at a strategy where they would match all of the grants that you make, or better still, they could provide you with unrestricted additional dollars that you could use as you direct through your grant making pool, right? We talk about this in the Bank of America primer that we put together for this group of donors, many of whom are our clients, related to racial justice giving in particular, right? So many of these donors are looking to move one level, two levels more deeper into the nonprofit structure, getting closer and closer to these community-based organizations. For large-scale funders, it is very difficult for them to manage in their current process. Note, we certainly are working with these donors to augment those processes, to make them less burdensome, both on them as a funder, but certainly on the grantees primarily. But in the current structure for many funders, it's very, very difficult to monitor many grants, particularly if they are in lower dollar amounts. So leaving that work to the giving circle by giving them additional dollars to grant in your process can be incredibly beneficial to their desire to move into community-based organizations and beyond the more likely suspects in that area. We're going to put that primer in the chat, and certainly I would love your feedback on it if you have it. All right, let's talk about our research. So our research, again, been going on since 2006. It is an exhaustive study of roughly the top 3 to 5% of Americans in terms of income and wealth. In order to be able to participate in our study, you must at least meet the threshold of an accredited investor. You may be familiar with this standard. It is not ours, it is from the federal government related to investments. So you either have to have $200,000 in income or a net worth of $1 million, excluding the value of your primary residence. Well, what comes back to us is a substantially more affluent group overall. On average, this particular group has an income of more than $500,000 per year and or assets on average of $31 million a year. So again, this is roughly the top 3 to 5% of Americans in terms of income and wealth. Why is this group so important? Why do we study this group? Why does it matter to nonprofits? Well, we know from Giving USA that in 2020, we set a new record for giving overall. $471 billion given to nonprofits. What we also know from the Giving USA data is that of that $471 billion, $471 billion, let that sink in 2020, knowing what we know about the challenges of that year. Of those dollars, 86% came from individuals and families, either in their lifetimes or at death. We spend a lot of time in the philanthropic sector talking about corporate giving and institutional grant makers giving, right? Think about the Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, when in reality, those givers combined are only 14% of the market, only 14% of the market, not diminishing the importance of their contributions in any way, but keeping our eyes on individuals and families and the power of those donors, including Giving Circle members, is essential, absolutely critical. So at Bank of America with the Lilly School, we take that Giving USA research and then we go deep. We go deep on the affluent donors. We do it because they're our clients and we want them to be more self-aware, but we also do it for nonprofits, right? So they can be more strategic in accessing those dollars because the bulk of the donors and the bulk of the dollars are coming from that top 3 to 5%. So what do I mean? In terms of donor participation, we see many, many, many more affluent Americans giving for all the obvious reasons, right? They have more income and wealth that is available for charitable giving. So if you see this slide, the dark blue slide, 88%, that is the participation rate in 2022 for, I'm sorry, in 2020 for giving overall. 88% is the high net worth giving in 2022. The light blue bar, 49%, that's the giving rate in 2020 for the general population, This is a trend that we've seen sustained basically since the Great Recession. Before the Great Recession, more than 2/3 of Americans of every income and wealth category on an annual basis were making some contribution to a charitable organization. Now that number has declined precipitously and it's stuck at less than 50%. You may be asking, what about that 10 or 12% of those Americans that you've described that have all that money? Why are they sitting on the sidelines? We're going to talk about that today. There's a lot of dry powder out there that could be accessed by your Giving Circle. So it's not only the participation rates that are significantly different as it relates to affluent donors versus the overall giving population. Look at these numbers in terms of the amount given. Over $40,000 in 2020 from the affluent Americans, where it was closer to 2,500 in the general population. That was a 2018 number, the most recent data we have available. You might also be asking, $43,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. But didn't you tell me that on average they make $500,000 a year, and on average they have $31 million in wealth? I did. I told you that. So there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines, not only from non-givers, but certainly from the affluent donors as well. You know this because you're Giving Circle people. You know that whatever misconception that may be out there about the donor profile, particularly the affluent donor profile, being an older white man, au contraire, oh, not so, not so, not so. I won't linger on this slide because I know I'm preaching to the proverbial choir, but we see generosity in every segment, whether it's gender, race or ethnicity, age, LGBTQ plus, broad generosity across all of these groups. Women, of course, got to put in a plug for the amazing work we're doing at the Women's Philanthropy Institute. Women, of course, leading the way. Also thinking when you're looking at transformational gifts, at who would be making the decisions about going big in terms of investing as a co-funder or investing in your grants pool with your giving circle. Most of the families where there is a partnered household are making big decisions, in particular jointly, roughly 50%. In our experience, when those decisions are made independently, normally what you'll be getting is what we call go away money. So certainly not the transformational gifts that we'd be looking for to really leverage the power of this sector. The 43,000 and change is generally divided among a number of organizations, 7 on average. So know that not only are you competing for those dollars, but they are spread more broadly. So really your opportunity is to bring them ideas that are so big and so bold that they're willing to stretch beyond their typical spend. So this is really important, particularly as you're looking to frame your case for support for bringing resources to deploy through your grant making process that would be aligned with their current patterns of giving, which we're going to talk about in the next few slides. But what I want you to really think about are their motivations for giving, right? So first, we're going to talk about patterns of giving. This is interesting data, but the motivations for giving, which we'll get to in 4 or 5 slides, are where I want you to sit up straight and have another sip of your coffee, please. Okay, so where are they currently giving? This is a slide that's talking about donor participation, right? These are numbers of gifts, not the amount of those gifts. So in terms of donor participation, basic needs and religion, health as well, carried the day. This is very consistent with what we've seen in prior studies. This basic needs category popped up to the top above religion in terms of incidence of gifts in the Great Recession, and that momentum has not changed. That continues to be a top priority for affluent Americans. The other slide I want you to pay attention to in terms of donor participation, because this is really important in showing an interest in particular areas, right? Remember, these participation numbers, they're going to be different than what we call wallet share numbers, so the amount of your gift. But it does show an interest and a potential to deepen and grow. 1 in 4 in 2020 made a contribution to a social justice cause or organization. 1 in 4. You also see this affinity giving overall. So not affinity giving within a particular racial or ethnic group or by gender. You see that really strong across the board, hovering at roughly 1 in 6, 1 in 7, in all of these different affinity categories. You do see a drop off as it relates to LGBTQ, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian American causes. We anticipate changes there over time, but certainly important to recognize that participation rates being lower there today. But this is the really interesting point I want you to capture. This is the wallet share. As interesting as the donor participation slides are, just knowing where they feel moved to make even one contribution, where you really understand the priorities, the passions, is when you look at how any charitable dollar is divided among these different areas. And we still see religion carrying the day. In terms of wallet share, carrying the day. We saw a significant downward swing related to religion. We think that's for 2 reasons. One, some outlier gifts that happened in 2017. But really what's more interesting are the macro trends. The first being, of course, what was happening in 2020. We know that most significant giving to places of worship, which is what this is. They're not faith-based organizations where like a faith-based university or a faith-based human services organization. These are places of worship. We know that most of those gifts come in a pledged fashion, not dropped in and offering collection during actual worship services for the most part. So there is a suggestion that some of that giving declined in 2020 because people weren't worshiping in congregations of all kinds in person due to disruption related to the pandemic. But we're also looking very closely at macro trends related to religious participation. This increase interest in spiritual but not religious, decline in many worshiping congregations, membership. The reason why this matters for giving circles, two. One is many people learn traditions of giving and benevolence in places of worship. And if places of worship are not teaching giving circles need to step in and fill that void, number one. I feel a huge call around that, that there's an opportunity for giving circles to step in where places of worship are not able to carry the day. The other thing to keep in mind is we know that giving overall has for 40 plus years been stuck at roughly 2% of GDP. During the Great Recession, it went down as low as 1.6. We've seen it go as high as 2.2, verging on 2.3, but it's roughly 2%. And so if the religious piece of the pie is the biggest and potentially to be redistributed, right? If we believe that that's not just going to lead the philanthropic ecosystem, but actually it'll be redistributed, really looking at that group of former donors or potential entrants to that space is really, really, really important to giving circles, but to the philanthropic and nonprofit sector much, much, much more broadly. So look in particular here at the social and racial justice wallet share. Remember, 25% gave a gift, but those gifts combined only represented 5% of the overall giving, only 5% of the overall giving. Basic needs carries the day. And certainly education, when you look at it combined with K through 12 and higher education, those are the categories that tend to capture the most interest from affluent Americans. I want to bust a myth here, right? Another myth I'm here to bust about these donors. There is a suggestion that they're prioritizing arts and culture, right? The symphony, art museums, the ballet. And yes, they did, in particular in 2020, in response to the significant disruptions to the business models because they weren't able to earn the income that they had in other years. But look at in 2017, only 2% of the giving overall in the arts and culture bucket. Okay, if you hear only one thing today, only one thing, I want you to sit up, have a little sip of your tea, your coffee, a little swig of water, get comfortable in your chair. If you're taking a walk while you're listening, maybe turn up the volume on your earbuds just a little bit, because this is it. If there's one thing you remember about how to build your case for support, to encourage these high capacity donors to lean in a transformational way to boost your ability to fund the organizations that you know to be driving substantial community impact. If there's one thing to know, that they will make their decision about whether to invest in you or invest with you as a giving circle based on their personal values. Their values, not your compelling pitch or case for support. That's the third from the bottom. 72%, 74% in our last study are just looking for organizations that are aligned with things that they care about. So to figure out what these donors care about, you've got to do some things, right? The first thing, of course, is to leverage everything available to you in the public domain, all of those things. And then when you get the audience, when you have the opportunity to explore whether a partnership would make sense to them and make sense to you, the very, very, very most important thing you'll do is listen. Listen deeply. Listen with curiosity. Listen with the desire to understand, because only then will you really know, right? Whether that's that connection, that nexus between the work that you're doing and the things that they care about. Know that when we're working with our clients, who are these high net worth and ultra high net worth philanthropists, we shine a light on this data. We shine a light and we say to them, you tell us that you give on the basis of your personal values. How can we be sure that those values are informed by the greatest needs of the community as they may be evolving and changing over time? How can we help you find that intersection between the greatest needs of the community, however you define it, and the things that you care the most about? And that should be your job too. I see that we've had something pop up in the Q&A. So there was a question about giving to university endowments. And that is, and the question is it primarily to university endowments? And we see a substantial shift in that, and particularly recently. So yes, university endowments continue to draw interest from donors that care deeply about sustainability of institutions that they care about, whether because they attended or family members attended. But what we're increasingly seeing is two things. One, that there's urgency within the donors that we advise, and certainly the sector more broadly, to put their money to work right now. Looking at a 4% spend, a 4.5% spend, maybe a 5% spend on a higher end from endowment assets can create some frustration among donors around solving the needs of the organization today, right now. So the second thing is they're also looking at how those endowment funds are invested, right? There's a slide later in the presentation around impact investing, and just making sure that the investments also are aligned with their values. So whether it's avoiding exposure to carbon, working to a climate friendly portfolio, or firearms, or fill in the blank other areas, or even more proactively making sure that the managers of the funds represent the diversity and inclusion goals that they have. There's a lot to be done in the endowment context in a mission aligned way with donors, but it's a great question. Keep those questions coming, please. Donors increasingly are looking to invest in issues, not in specific organizations, which is a very good story for giving circles. Many of these giving circles are newer. They're not institutions that they may have known and grown up with from childhood. And so really focusing on the issues that the giving circles are trying to address does carry the day with many donors, particularly the younger ones. Okay. This is a very busy slide. I'm going to just point to the top line, and I'm going to mention this not only as it relates to you, the giving circle, but also in how you are functioning as a grant maker. So roughly 90% of affluent donors say that they care a lot, or at least it's important, that the organization that they fund only spends a reasonable amount on administrative and fundraising expenses. If you have not seen Dan Pallotta's TED Talk, I implore that you please do so. Bookmark it, just like you will Sarah's TED Talk, which is phenomenal about giving circles, because it'll talk with you about the overhead myth and the scarcity mentality that we put on our grantees. But I will say, while we try to coach donors around the nuance in this question along the lines that I've just described, they do care about it. And giving circles pass this test with 100% and 5 gold stars, right? Most of our organizations are primarily driven by volunteers, right? So the administrative overhead ratios are really, really quite low compared with others in the sector. So we've got a really great story to tell there. So what are the challenges with these donors? How can we get a greater percentage of that income and that wealth out the door? Helping them understand how to give and how to measure the impact, right? I mean, we have wealth advisors, of course, have an important role in this, but you do as well, right? I mean, inviting them to the table to help them understand the needs of the community so they can prioritize their giving is a great service to them, as well as a service to you, because it provides pathways for engagement. Let's see here. I'm just looking in the chat again. Yeah, I want to come back to the conversation around overhead because it's a really nuanced one. The question was, how can giving circles help change the narrative around the overhead myth and scarcity mentality imposed on nonprofits? I think the first way to do it is in our grant making, right? To make sure that we're not asking questions that push them to give an answer that they shouldn't, right? If we're not focusing on that, we're focusing on their impact and their leadership and their fiduciary mindset and their stewardship of resources, and not focusing on these arbitrary ratios. I think that we can carry the day in many important ways because we're leaders. We're looked to in our communities as leaders, as philanthropists. And so we can do that with our own best practices. So going on to that 12% that have all that money that are not giving. So there are 4 top reasons that are identified on this slide. And 2 of them, it's a hard time moving the meter, right? If they tell you that their priority is taking care of their family, their priority is taking care of their family. If they tell you that they don't want to give to charity, I also don't know what to do with that. That's like a little bit like a toddler saying they don't want a bath. I don't know what you do with that. You can pick up the toddler and drop them in. It's a little bit harder to access the bank account of a high net worth or ultra high net worth individual. We don't have that power, but that mantra sounds a lot like what I heard back in the day. Maybe we've got some parents on the line that hear it now. But the other two, certainly it is completely within our power to change. I did not have a connection to an organization. 22%, right? 1 in 5 say that they didn't give because they didn't have a connection to an organization. Roughly the same percentage didn't give because they weren't asked. Because they weren't asked, right? And so giving circles can fix both of those things, right? If you don't have connections to organizations, use us as your intermediary, right? We can interface you with those organizations. And by the way, build a connection with us. We are philanthropic organizations in our own right. We are both philanthropists and institutions that are nonprofits. We're both. We sit at that intersection. And certainly the invitation. And so much of this happens as members, right? If you first bring them in as members, then you can create the pipeline for these transformational contributions as funders and co-grant makers. They do stop giving, and mostly it's because we badger them. Roughly 25% of high net worth households will eliminate an organization from their giving plan year over year. And the most important reason why is because we badger them with too many requests. Impact. I've yet to find a donor that didn't care about whether their gift made a difference, right? The way we're measuring impact is changing substantially. Our realization around lack of equity and racism that's built into some of the impact measurements certainly there's an increased awareness around that. But people want to know that there is impact, that something is happening, the so what of why they gave. But guess what? Guess how they know about the impact of their giving? 82% know because we tell them, right? So make sure that the narrative is one that you feel really, really great about. Just a little bit of information about how affluent donors are mostly giving. As you would guess, based on the levels of giving, most of it's just coming from their credit cards and their checking accounts. You're not dipping into that $31 million that is their wealth. And that wealth can be held up in a number of ways. Publicly traded securities are the most tax efficient and easy way to give for many of these donors, but the wealth is in other places. It's in closely held business interests, real estate, whether it's commercial or residential, farmland, timberland, fine arts, collectibles, cryptocurrency. So as we build that relationship with these donors, it's important to think more expansively about what they could bring to the table to help fund these gifts. Again, most of these gifts are coming from their immediate assets. However, this affluent donor population increasingly is leveraging donor advice funds, and family foundations, private foundations to structure their giving. The growth in the donor advice fund area is substantial. We could certainly talk about that in the Q&A. Notice when you go up market, right? So when we're looking at that $5 to $20 million group as a representative example, look at some of the things they're telling us, that sliver, that 5 to 20 million group. The first thing they're telling us is only 30% are monitoring or evaluating impact at all, right? They tell us it's really important and they care about it, but they're not doing it. So we have to make it really, really, really easy in a combination of ways, telling them the stories, but also leveraging the data, that combination of stories and data with the emphasis on stories, really humanizing or localizing these causes that they're funding. 60% almost are going to have a giving vehicle, whether it's a donor advised fund, a private foundation, a bequest strategy, split interest trust, well over half, going close to 60%. The last bit is a little bit discouraging because remember, they're looking to us, 82%, to tell them whether their giving is having an impact. Not even half are really sure about that. So certainly an opportunity for stewardship as well as cultivation with these donors. This is that impact investing information that popped up in that really, really great question about endowments. If people don't know about impact investing and you want to talk about it more in the Q&A, let's absolutely do that. But in general, it's leveraging investment portfolios, not just investment portfolios in a philanthropic vehicle, but broader investment portfolios, your personal and family wealth in a way that aligns with your values, right? And so roughly 60% of affluent Americans are employing impact investing strategies in some way with their personal or with their philanthropic capital. A few of them, 5%, are no longer giving to nonprofit organizations because they believe they can achieve their social goals through sustainable investing practices. So they are leaving the traditional nonprofit philanthropic sector completely. Roughly a third are somewhere in between. They may be leveraging some of the philanthropic dollars for impact investing, but they're not replacing all of them. So we need to be paying attention to all of these groups, particularly if you are yourself an endowed giving circle. There aren't that many of them out there, but over time, I think we're going to see that change and making sure you're being really thoughtful about how you're investing your own assets. You would not be surprised to see that in general, we see millennials and younger, millennials and Gen Z being more interested in impact investing. But look at these participation rates in impact investing with Black African Americans and also LGBTQ+. You really are seeing these segments pulling every lever available to them to try to create the change they want to see in the world. I'm mentioning volunteering because it will encourage you, I hope, to engage these affluent Americans as members of your giving circle, either at the beginning of their journey as a funder of your circle or a co-grant maker, but certainly as that relationship nurtures over time, because there is a very, very, very close connection between giving and volunteering, particularly among women, So if you look, first, these volunteering numbers, remember, this is 2020. So it's sad, these numbers, but it was very difficult for people to volunteer, right? Particularly the older Americans, just given stay-at-home requirements and other things related to the pandemic. Typically, we would see the older than millennials volunteering number like off the charts, but because they were a vulnerable population, it was particularly difficult for them. But look at this. When you look at the giving levels, you see an almost 2x in terms of the amount given between a volunteer and a non-volunteer. This is my last slide. And then I really want to get into some of your conversations, some of your war stories, some of your questions, your lessons learned. But this is really an important slide. We monitor confidence in societal institutions among this donor population in every one of our studies, because we want to know how nonprofits are being perceived as agents for positive social change, right? And year over year, we see nonprofit organizations in at least the top two. In 2020, they carried the day. Individuals are close behind. They do believe that individuals, maybe including or particularly themselves, have the ability to do really great things in terms of moving our world to a place where it's better educated, healthier, more humane. But nonprofits do carry the day. Look at how businesses and governments are regarded, not very highly, particularly Congress down there at the very bottom. So I will pause there. Certainly eager to hear what you're seeing, and also, of course, want to continue the conversation on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You'll see me tweeting a lot about women's leadership more broadly, but certainly the amazing research coming out of the Women's Philanthropy Institute, as well as the research that Bank of America is bringing, including our study of philanthropy and high net worth and ultra high net worth donors. But just eager to hear, of course, what's on your minds as well.
Dianne, we have many questions in the chat and also in the Q&A. Let me know if you cannot see them.
I can only see the Q&A questions. I cannot see the chat questions, but I'll go ahead and address the questions around volunteers. So are volunteer numbers based on a general volunteer? Are there figures for fundraising specific volunteers? So I did kind of glide past that slide because I wasn't sure there would be interest in it. Here, let me pull up the PowerPoint because we do have a breakdown. One thing I will say is that the volunteer numbers are really skewed because the pandemic was so disruptive, and these are 2020 numbers, but this will give you a general sense of how affluent Americans are volunteering. First things first is you see this relative basis between the older than millennial and then the millennial and Gen Z in terms of their ability to volunteer. I mean, none of that should be surprising to you, of course. one of the main ways we see these donors volunteer is by serving on the board of directors. 27%. Now, keep in mind, that is a blended number of all ages. One of the most interesting pieces of research that we're putting out, and really a tactical guide, and it should be in the next roughly 3 weeks. Check my Twitter feed for it, or LinkedIn. I'd be delighted to connect with you there. Is related to board diversity. And there is a huge gap between the interest in younger donors, and certainly a much more diverse group of donors in serving, than the opportunity to serve. We've looked at the significant cultural as well as structural barriers to building diverse and really inclusive boards of directors. So look out for that guidance from us. It's very, very tactical in identifying the obstacles, but more importantly, suggesting very specific opportunities for transition. There we go. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, let's see here. Thanks for the presentation. Will you please expand on your message of donors give according to their values? How would you suggest an organization can educate in a partnering way, not didactic, potential donors who are very interested in a certain area, but not quite committed? Again, I cannot overstate that data point. I mean, just burn it into your brain. Almost 3/4 of high capacity affluent donors are driven by their personal values and their giving choices, right? And so I think about it as matchmaking, right? It's matchmaking. It's really building the relationship where you understand what they care about, and then discerning whether there's an intersection in your priorities and what they care about, right? So if you're an organization that is, really, really focused on arts and culture, for example, right? And they're in the 95% that aren't arts and culture funders, you're probably not going to persuade them to all of a sudden sit up straight and be interested in arts and culture. However, if they are in that majority category that care about basic needs, I'm guessing that most of the Philanthropy Together organizations have some grant-making strategy that's focused on lifting up people that are struggling, right? And so your job is to find where there is that point of connection, right? Is it around basic needs? Is it around education? Is it around healthcare? And once you find that point of intersection, that's when you have the opportunity to educate them about how funding or co-investing with you can help them achieve their personal goals in these areas in a way that is more efficient, more innovative, and ultimately more personally rewarding. One data point that is not in the deck and I'll tell you why. It's a little bit of inside baseball. We can only ask but so many questions of these individuals, right? I mean, it takes a lot to get them to participate. We can only ask so many questions. And so one of the questions that I love, we didn't ask in 2020 because we wanted to create space to ask new questions about the pandemic giving, about giving for racial justice. And we get the same answer every time to the question that is, does giving and does volunteering, these two questions, enhance your life satisfaction? Does philanthropy make you happy? And the answer every year that we ask the question is overwhelmingly, resoundingly, yes, giving makes us happy. It enhances our life satisfaction. And so I mention this because, when you're inviting this group to a relationship with you that includes funding your organization or co-funding or directing grants, know that when they give to you, they're going to be happier. There's an endorphin boost. So just remind yourself that you're doing them a favor to really give them the opportunity to be part of your organization. And certainly we know if they do decide at the beginning or as a maturation of that relationship to become members of your giving circle, there is no greater joy, at least in my experience, than being part of a giving circle. So certainly commend that to them as well. I see another one. Sarah, do you want to bring up anything that's maybe repeating itself in the chat?
I actually moved all the questions to the Q&A, so they're all there.
I can see them.
And
okay.
I know, we're running out of time. So if Dianne doesn't answer to your question right now, we're going to move those questions to Huba. And also, Dianne put her Twitter handle there. We're going to share it too in the chat, so you can, keep asking. And also, we will put the report there. And I will put it again in the chat.
And we have a few more minutes. We go to the top of the hour, or are we?
We're supposed to finish a minute ago, but you can go over, 3-4 minutes before people have to move to the other one.
Okay, because I'm going to hit some of these. Okay, so how do you think we could get financial advisors to talk about giving circles so that high net worth donors know it's even an option to join? I'm so glad you asked, because in the chat, you have the link to the racial justice giving guide that includes this specifically as a strategy. So at least we're doing it at Bank of America. And that's also a reason why we are sponsors of Philanthropy Together, right? Because we want our clients to know how much they can learn about philanthropy from being a Giving Circle member, and importantly, how they can deploy their resources in a really effective and efficient way by partnering with Giving Circles. And so we've already talked about how Giving Circles can change the conversations about overhead. The first way you do it is modifying your own grant-making practices. So you train up new leaders in philanthropy to change the conversation. So how could a Giving Circle find these high net worth donors to even pitch or start that conversation? That is where the public domain is your friend. There is lots of information out there about who is giving in your community, who is a business owner in your community, who has inherited assets in your community. And then that's where the relationship mapping starts. Can you get to them through your members? Can you get to them through your grantees? Some of these individuals will respond to an invitation for a meeting, certainly with some materials. One of the best ways is earned media. Earned media, write that down. We see so many of our clients and other funders, they read about Giving Circles, and they, if you can make the case and then be credentialized by a reporter, certainly Sarah is doing an amazing job on a national and global basis to get the word out. These earned media opportunities can be really, really powerful to get the attention of these ultra high net worth and high net worth individuals that are outside of your spheres of influence. So I am we've got two more here. One of them is the difference between wealth inheritors and wealth creators. And yes, there absolutely are differences. People that create their wealth, particularly as entrepreneurs, we see often are more interested in making big bets in innovation. And I think that this Giving Circle co-funding grant-making opportunity certainly is in that category. We see wealth inheritors many times being very interested in learning more about philanthropy, but also resistant to the way generations before them have engaged with philanthropy. So they're really interested in learning new models. And so a great place to engage those rising generation wealth inheritors as members of Giving Circle. And the last bit is about the data. The data is really about high net worth donors more broadly, not specifically high net worth members of Giving Circle. So this is the broader population. And I've gone over, but let's stay connected. So grateful for your leadership. Giving circles are democratizing and diversifying philanthropy in all the ways we know it needs to be. So, Sarah, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a privilege.
No, thank you so much, Diane. I mean, so great information, right? And some of them I know we were getting riled up, like, oh my God, why are people not giving? But there's an opportunity, there's potential, and the more we know the data, the more strategic we can be. So thank you so much. We appreciate all your insights in the topic. Before we wrap up, please remember to answer our 2-question poll before exiting this meeting. The poll is just launched. Take you a second. And in the next few days, you will find the recording of the session on your agenda. We will transfer some of the questions there too. And jump to the next session will be Money Talks, tips for having open conversations about giving. Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you, Sarah.